Rain drifted through the streets of New Orleans like cigarette smoke, blurring neon lights across wet pavement in the French Quarter. Jazz music floated between old brick buildings, while tourists wandered beneath balconies dripping with ivy and rusted iron railings. Ethan Vale stood beneath the awning of a small bar on Bourbon Street, adjusting the lens of his camera. He had arrived in Louisiana 3 days earlier for a freelance photography assignment. Nightlife, street culture, musicians, old architecture. The city fascinated him immediately. Everything felt alive after dark, beautiful, and slightly rotten underneath. Around midnight, while photographing a trumpet player near Jackson Square, Ethan first noticed the musician. A man sitting alone beneath a flickering green neon sign, playing an old acoustic guitar. Late 40s, maybe older. Dark coat, gray eyes, sharp smile. A half-empty glass of whiskey rested beside him, while rain tapped softly against the pavement around his chair. People stopped constantly to listen, and every person who approached him reacted strangely. The musician greeted strangers by name before introductions were ever made. He asked tourists about hometowns he should not have known. He remembered birthdays, family details, recent arguments. One woman nearly dropped her drink after the man casually asked whether her brother's surgery in Houston had gone well. Ethan assumed at first it was some kind of performance, cold reading, psychological tricks, but the reactions looked genuine, disturbed. The musician noticed Ethan watching from across the street and smiled. "You're not from here," he called out calmly. Ethan approached cautiously with his camera hanging from his shoulder. "No," he admitted, "Chicago." The musician nodded slowly while continuing to play guitar. "You almost drowned when you were 9. Ethan froze instantly. Rainwater dripped from nearby balconies, while the music around the quarter suddenly felt very far away. "How did you know that?" The musician only smiled faintly. "People carry things with them," he replied. "Most don't realize how visible they are." His voice carried a calm southern drawl that felt strangely hypnotic. Ethan tried laughing it off, but unease settled deep inside him. The man introduced himself as Gabriel Mercer, street musician, traveler. "Been here a long time," he said softly. Ethan photographed him several times beneath the neon lights while rain reflected red and green across the pavement. Gabriel looked oddly timeless through the camera lens, impossible to place within any specific decade. Before leaving, the musician gave Ethan one final smile. "You should stop digging into old photographs," he warned gently. Ethan frowned. "What photographs?" But Gabriel had already resumed playing guitar. The next morning, Ethan visited a small used bookstore near Royal Street searching for historical photography books about New Orleans. While flipping through old newspapers stacked near the back counter, he suddenly froze. A face stared back at him from a yellowed newspaper clipping dated 1987. Gabriel Mercer. Same eyes, same smile, no older. The article described a missing tourist from Tennessee last seen in the French Quarter nearly 40 years earlier. Ethan's pulse quickened. He searched deeper through the newspaper archives. Another article from 1974, different name, same face. Then another from 1991. Again, different identity, same man. Every article involved disappearances, missing travelers, dead men, unidentified bodies. Yet somehow Gabriel Mercer appeared beside them repeatedly across decades without aging at all. The bookstore owner noticed Ethan's expression. "You okay there?" Ethan slid the articles across the counter carefully. "Do you know this guy?" The old man behind the register glanced down and immediately looked uncomfortable. "Where'd you find these? So you recognize him?" The owner hesitated before speaking quietly. "People around here say he changes names every few years." Ethan laughed nervously. "That's impossible." The old man leaned closer. "Son, New Orleans is full of impossible things." That night, rain returned harder than before. The French Quarter glowed beneath reflections of neon signs and police lights while thunder rolled above the Mississippi River. Ethan walked carefully through crowded streets, searching for Gabriel again. He finally found him beneath the same green neon sign, still playing guitar, still smiling, as if he had been waiting. "You found the articles," Gabriel said calmly without looking up. Ethan felt cold tension creep through his chest. "Who are you?" Gabriel stopped playing. For several seconds, only rain filled the silence between them. Then the musician spoke softly. Do you know how easy it is, he asked, for dead people to disappear completely? Ethan said nothing. No bills, no records, no family looking anymore. Gabriel smiled faintly. A dead man leaves behind an empty space. Most people never notice when someone else steps into it. Thunder cracked overhead. Ethan stared carefully at the musician's face. You steal identities. Gabriel chuckled quietly. Steal? He repeated. No, I preserve them. The street around them suddenly felt emptier, quieter. Tourists passed nearby without noticing the tension. Gabriel leaned closer. You'd be amazed how many people want to vanish, he whispered. Some run from debt, some run from guilt. Others simply grow tired of being themselves. His eyes locked onto Ethan's. And some identities are abandoned so completely they become available. Ethan stepped backward instinctively. Then he noticed something horrifying beside Gabriel's guitar case. Several wallets, driver's licenses, photographs, rainwater soaked them beneath the neon light. Gabriel followed Ethan's stare calmly. People leave pieces of themselves everywhere, he said softly. At that moment, Ethan realized something else. He had never once seen anyone actually speak to Gabriel for very long. People approached, listened, then disappeared back into crowds, as though drawn toward him briefly before vanishing again into the city. Ethan backed away slowly. I'm calling the police. Gabriel smiled sadly. And tell them what? The question hit harder than Ethan expected. What proof did he actually have? Old photographs, coincidences, rumors, a man who somehow never aged. Gabriel resumed strumming his guitar quietly beneath the rain. Then he spoke one final sentence without looking up. The article from Chicago, he murmured. About your father. Ethan froze completely. He had never mentioned his father. Nobody in New Orleans knew about that case. Not possible. Slowly, Gabriel lifted his eyes toward him. I knew him too. The rain suddenly felt freezing against Ethan's skin. He stumbled backward into the crowded street, pulse hammering violently in his chest. Cars splashed through flooded roads, while jazz music echoed through alleyways behind him. When Ethan looked back again, the musician was gone. Only the guitar remained beneath the neon sign. The next morning, Ethan attempted showing the newspaper clippings to local police. None of the articles existed anymore. The library archives showed missing pages. Digital records had vanished. Even the bookstore owner denied ever speaking to him. 3 days later, Ethan boarded a flight back to Chicago exhausted and paranoid. While waiting at the airport terminal, he stopped cold after noticing a man sitting several rows away reading a newspaper. Dark coat, gray eyes, sharp smile, different hairstyle, different name printed on the boarding pass beside him, but the exact same face. Snow fell heavily across the suburbs outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, swallowing streets beneath layers of white and muting the world into silence. Porch lights glowed faintly through the storm, while freezing wind rattled bare tree branches against rooftops. Inside the Harper family home, 19-year-old Emily Carter watched snow pile against the windows and wondered if she should have stayed home. The babysitting job had sounded simple enough. 2 children, 1 night, good pay. The parents, Daniel and Rebecca Harper, lived in a quiet neighborhood of large colonial houses tucked along a wooded hillside 30 minutes outside the city. Everything about them seemed normal. Polite smiles, expensive furniture, family photographs lining the walls. But from the moment Emily arrived, something felt wrong. It started with the basement door, a heavy wooden door near the kitchen secured by 3 separate locks. Before leaving for dinner in downtown Pittsburgh, Rebecca had stopped beside the basement entrance and spoken carefully. No matter what happens, she said, forcing a smile, do not open that door. Emily laughed nervously. Why? Creepy basement, Daniel answered before his wife could. Old pipes, he said quickly. The storm makes strange noises down there. His voice sounded rehearsed. Rebecca handed Emily emergency numbers while avoiding eye contact with the basement entirely. And if you hear knocking, she added quietly, ignore it. Then they left. The snowstorm worsened after dark. By 8:30 p.m., visibility outside had nearly vanished. Thick snowflakes slammed against the windows, while icy wind howled around the house. The 2 Harper children, 8-year-old Mason and 6-year-old Claire, sat quietly watching cartoons beneath blankets in the living room. Neither child spoke much. Emily tried making conversation while preparing macaroni in the kitchen. So what's in the basement? She joked lightly. The children immediately went silent. Claire stared down at the floor. Mason looked toward the locked door nervously. "We're not supposed to talk about him," he whispered. Emily frowned. "Talk about who?" But neither child answered. Around 10 p.m., the first sound came from downstairs, a dull thud. Then another, slow, heavy, like someone walking carefully beneath the floorboards. Emily froze in the hallway listening. The children heard it too. Claire immediately covered her ears. Mason turned the television volume louder without saying a word. The footsteps continued for several seconds before stopping abruptly. Emily forced herself to laugh nervously. Probably pipes, but deep down she knew it wasn't. Pipes didn't sound like footsteps. The storm intensified near midnight. Snow buried the driveway completely, and power lines outside swayed violently in the wind. Emily attempted calling her boyfriend, but cell service kept cutting out. Then the house lights flickered. Once, twice. Darkness swallowed the entire home. Claire screamed instantly. The heating system died with a metallic groan, leaving only silence and the distant roar of wind outside. Emily found flashlights in the kitchen drawer while trying to calm the children. That was when the knocking began, 3 slow knocks from beneath the basement door. Knock, knock, knock. Emily's blood turned cold. The children stared at her with terrified expressions. "It's okay," she whispered shakily, though she didn't believe it herself. Then came a voice. Soft, muffled, almost impossible to hear beneath the storm. "Please." Emily stepped closer to the basement. "Help me." The voice sounded male, weak, desperate. Claire began crying immediately. "Don't open it," she whispered. Mason grabbed Emily's sleeve tightly. "He lies," the boy said quietly. Another knock echoed through the hallway. "Please," the voice repeated. "He locked me down here." Emily's heart pounded violently. Every instinct told her to call police, but the storm had knocked out phone service completely. The house sat isolated beneath heavy snow, with no nearby neighbors visible through the blizzard outside. The voice downstairs sounded terrified, human. Emily approached the basement door slowly. The locks looked old but recently used. Her flashlight beam shook across scratched wood and chipped paint. Near the bottom of the door, she noticed faint marks along the floor, as if someone had been sliding things underneath. Then she saw it. A photograph, partially sticking out from beneath the door. Emily crouched carefully and pulled it free. The picture showed Daniel Harper standing beside another man outside the same house years earlier. But the second man's face had been scratched out violently. More photographs followed, dozens of them shoved beneath the crack. Family gatherings, Christmas mornings, birthday parties. In every photo, someone different stood beside the Harpers. Different men, different women, all later scratched out completely. Emily backed away slowly. Then she noticed another item beneath the door, a driver's license, Pennsylvania ID. The photograph showed Daniel Harper, but the name read Michael Vale. Another ID slid through afterward. Same face, different name, then another, and another. Emily stared in horror at the growing pile. Different states, different identities, same man. The basement voice began speaking again. "He steals lives," it whispered weakly. "He brings people here." The temperature inside the house suddenly felt freezing. Emily looked toward the children. Mason avoided her eyes. Finally, he whispered something barely audible. "There used to be another babysitter." A loud crash shook the house upstairs. Emily nearly screamed. Footsteps echoed across the ceiling above them. Someone was inside the home, but the parents weren't supposed to return until morning. The children immediately panicked. "He's back early," Claire whispered. Then the front door slowly creaked open upstairs. Snow blew into the entryway. Heavy boots stepped across hardwood floors, one deliberate step at a time. Emily grabbed the children and locked them inside the upstairs bathroom before creeping quietly into the hallway with the flashlight. The house had become unnaturally silent. No wind, no knocking, only footsteps moving slowly downstairs. Then a voice called softly from the darkness. "Emily?" Daniel Harper. But something sounded wrong. His tone felt flat, cold, like someone practicing how to sound human. Emily remained hidden at the top of the staircase, watching shadows move below. Then her flashlight beam briefly caught something horrifying near the front hallway mirror. A second figure standing behind Daniel, tall, thin, pale, watching silently. The same face from the IDs beneath the basement door. For one impossible moment, Both men looked identical. Then the lights suddenly returned. Every bulb in the house flickered on at once. The hallway downstairs stood empty. No footprints, no snow, no sign anyone had entered. Only the basement door remained waiting in silence at the end of the hallway, and from beneath it came one final whisper. "He'll make you forget me too." The Nevada desert looked endless at night. Miles of empty highway stretched beneath a black sky filled with cold stars, interrupted only by telephone poles and dry hills fading into darkness. Somewhere outside Ely, Nevada, the headlights of Noah Bennett's aging Honda cut through the emptiness as he drove east along Highway 50, the loneliest road in America. He regretted taking the route almost immediately. Noah was a 22-year-old college student returning to Colorado after visiting friends in California. His GPS had suggested the shortcut through Nevada would save several hours. Instead, it felt like he'd driven into another world. No radio stations, no towns, no traffic, just desert and silence. By 1:30 a.m., his fuel gauge dipped dangerously close to empty. That was when he spotted the gas station. The building stood alone beside the highway beneath a flickering red sign that read Silver Sage Gas and Mart. Two ancient fuel pumps sat beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, and beyond them stretched miles of empty desert illuminated by pale moonlight. Only one other vehicle occupied the parking lot, a black pickup truck. Its engine idled softly near the edge of the station. Noah parked beside the pumps and stepped outside into dry desert wind. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and dust. Somewhere far off, metal rattled against metal like loose fencing moving in the wind. He noticed the man immediately. The stranger sat inside the black pickup smoking a cigarette with the driver's window rolled halfway down. Middle-aged, thin face, baseball cap pulled low over tired eyes. He watched Noah carefully without expression, not threatening, just watching. Noah looked away and entered the station. Inside, the fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead. Rows of dusty snacks lined the shelves, and an old coffee machine hissed quietly near the counter. Country music played softly from a radio behind the register. The employee looked exhausted. A man in his late 50s with sunken eyes and gray stubble stood behind the counter reading a newspaper. He glanced toward Noah, then immediately toward the pickup truck outside. "You traveling alone?" the employee asked. "Yeah," Noah answered casually. "Heading back to Colorado." The man nodded slowly but didn't smile. Then he leaned slightly closer. "Don't talk to the guy outside," Noah blinked. "What?" "The man in the truck," the employee whispered quietly. "Don't trust him." A strange tension settled over the room. Noah glanced back through the windows toward the pickup. The stranger remained motionless inside, cigarette glowing faintly in darkness. "Why?" Noah asked. The employee hesitated too long before answering. "He's been here 3 nights." "That a problem?" Another pause. "He keeps changing names." Noah laughed nervously, assuming the man was joking, but the employee's expression never changed. "He comes in every night asking strange questions," he continued softly. "Questions about travelers, people driving alone, wants to know where they're headed." Noah suddenly felt aware of how isolated the station truly was. Miles from anywhere. No signal on his phone, just desert. The employee rang up Noah's snacks and gas silently before sliding the receipt across the counter. "Fill up," he said quietly, "then keep driving." As Noah turned toward the door, the employee grabbed his wrist suddenly. "Hard. Whatever he says," the man whispered. "Don't let him follow you." Outside, the desert wind had grown colder. Noah tried convincing himself the clerk was paranoid or unstable. Maybe the stranger was harmless. Maybe both men were simply lonely people, trapped in the middle of nowhere. Still, his hands shook slightly while pumping gas. The pickup truck's headlights flicked on. Slowly, the driver's door opened. The stranger stepped out, tall, thin, wearing faded jeans and a dark jacket. He smiled politely as he approached. "Long drive?" he asked casually. Noah forced a nod. "Yeah. Where you headed?" "Colorado." The stranger smiled wider. "College kid?" Noah felt tension tighten in his stomach. "How'd you know?" "Lucky guess." The man lit another cigarette while glancing toward the gas station windows. "You shouldn't trust that old clerk," he said calmly. "Guy's got problems." Noah said nothing. "He tells stories about everybody who stops here," the stranger continued. "Claims people are following him. Claims strangers are dangerous." The man chuckled softly. "But out here, he added, staring toward the desert. Everybody's dangerous eventually. Something about the way he said it unsettled Noah deeply. Then the stranger held out his hand. Name's Daniel. Noah noticed dirt beneath the man's fingernails and scratches along his wrist. He shook the hand anyway. The grip felt cold, too cold. Minutes later, Noah finally left the station. In his rearview mirror, the black pickup remained parked beneath the lights while the employee watched nervously from inside the store. For nearly an hour, the highway stayed empty. Then headlights appeared behind him, the pickup truck, following at a distance. Noah's pulse quickened. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. Every time he accelerated, the truck matched speed. Every time he slowed down, it stayed behind him. Miles passed beneath endless darkness. Then his phone suddenly picked up signal. A flood of notifications appeared instantly. One news alert caught his attention. Suspect linked to multiple identity theft cases across Southwest still missing. Noah opened the article while driving. The accompanying photo made his blood freeze. The man from the pickup truck. According to authorities, the suspect had traveled through Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico using stolen identities belonging to missing travelers. Witnesses described him approaching isolated motorists at gas stations and roadside motels before assuming their identities weeks later. Several disappearances remained unsolved. Noah looked back at the rearview mirror. The pickup's headlights still followed him through darkness. Closer now. His breathing became shallow. The article continued. Authorities warned travelers not to engage with suspect under any circumstances. Multiple aliases confirmed. Real identity unknown. Then Noah noticed something worse. The registration card sitting on his passenger seat was gone. So was his wallet. Panic surged through him instantly. He remembered shaking the man's hand beside the pumps. Remembered setting his wallet briefly on top of the car while fueling. The pickup flashed its headlights once behind him, almost playfully, then suddenly accelerated. The truck roared past Noah's Honda at terrifying speed before disappearing into darkness ahead. For several seconds, the highway became empty again. Then Noah saw taillights waiting motionless in the middle of the road ahead. The black pickup had stopped sideways across both lanes, engine idling, blocking the highway completely. The desert around him felt impossibly silent. No houses, no lights, no help. Only darkness and empty land stretching forever beneath the stars. Then the driver's door of the pickup slowly opened. The blackout began just after midnight. One moment the suburban neighborhood in Akron, Ohio glowed beneath streetlights and television screens, and the next, everything disappeared into darkness. Air conditioners died, porch lights vanished. The entire block fell silent, except for distant thunder rolling somewhere beyond the city. Evan Mercer stood by his apartment window staring outside at the rain. Across the parking lot, a faint candle flickered inside apartment 3B. Mrs. Laurel. That was the name everyone in the building used, though Evan doubted it was real. She had moved into the apartment 6 months earlier carrying only 2 suitcases and a cardboard box filled with books. She looked to be in her early 30s, quiet and polite, always dressed in neutral colors. She rarely spoke to neighbors, except for short greetings in the hallway, but something about her always felt carefully controlled. Calculated. Evan first noticed it after seeing her at the grocery store one afternoon. She had blonde hair, glasses, and wore oversized sweaters. 2 weeks later, he passed her again near the laundromat and barely recognized her. Her hair was now dark brown and cut shorter. The glasses were gone. Her makeup, posture, and even the way she walked had changed completely. At first, he assumed she simply liked changing styles. Then it kept happening. Every few weeks, she transformed into someone new. Red hair, black hair, different clothes, different accents. Once she appeared with a small tattoo on her wrist that vanished days later beneath makeup. Another time, she introduced herself to a delivery driver as Claire. The following week, Evan overheard her telling someone on the phone her name was Rebecca. The changes became impossible to ignore. Still, she remained strangely ordinary. She watered plants outside her door. She collected mail every morning at exactly 7:15. Sometimes soft jazz music drifted from her apartment late at night. But Evan noticed other things too. She never allowed maintenance workers inside. She covered her windows with heavy curtains, and occasionally, unfamiliar men parked outside the building watching apartment 3B for hours before driving away. One rainy evening, Evan returned home from work and found Mrs. Laurel kneeling beside her car in the parking lot, or whoever she was now. Her hair was short and jet black. She wore leather gloves despite the warm weather. When she looked up at him, he noticed bruising along her neck, partly hidden beneath makeup. "You okay?" Evan asked carefully. For a moment she stared at him with visible fear in her eyes. Then it disappeared instantly. "I'm fine," she replied softly, but her voice trembled. That same night, Evan heard shouting through the walls around 2 a.m., a man's voice, angry, demanding something. Then sudden silence. The next morning, the apartment looked untouched. No broken furniture, no police, nothing. 3 days later, the blackout happened. Rain hammered the apartment complex while emergency sirens echoed faintly across Akron. Residents stepped outside carrying flashlights and candles, talking nervously in the hallways. Evan stood near his doorway when he saw headlights enter the parking lot. 3 unmarked police vehicles. No sirens, no uniforms. Men in dark jackets climbed out carrying flashlights and moved directly toward apartment 3B. Evan watched from the shadows as one officer knocked hard on the door. No response. Another officer forced the lock open. The apartment door swung inward slowly. What happened next felt unreal. The officers entered cautiously with flashlights raised. Their voices remained low and tense as they searched room by room. Evan crept closer down the hallway until he could see inside. The apartment looked nothing like he expected. Every wall was covered with photographs, dozens of them. Different cities, different people, different identities. Pinned maps stretched across the living room with locations circled in red marker across Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Illinois. The kitchen table held stacks of fake driver's licenses and passports besides scissors, hair dye, makeup kits, and several cell phones. One officer opened a closet and froze. Inside hung rows of carefully organized clothing, wigs, jackets, glasses, shoes, enough to create entirely different appearances. Another officer discovered newspaper clippings hidden beneath the bed. Missing persons, disappearances, unsolved murders. Some articles dated back over 15 years. Each clipping had handwritten notes in the margins, names, dates, locations. Evan's stomach tightened as one detective lifted a photograph from the floor. It showed Mrs. Laurel standing beside a man Evan had seen around the building weeks earlier. The man was now listed as missing. "Jesus Christ," one officer whispered. Then they found the box, hidden beneath loose floorboards in the bedroom. Inside were at least 20 passports under different names but carrying the same woman's photograph with altered appearances. Blonde hair, brown hair, heavy makeup, no makeup, different ages, different identities, yet always her. One detective quietly spoke into his radio. "We found her archive." Archive. The word unsettled Evan more than anything else. As officers continued searching the apartment, another detective approached the bathroom mirror and wiped away steam covering the glass. Written across the mirror in black marker were 4 words: "You never really know anyone." Thunder shook the building. The lights suddenly returned, and every bulb inside apartment 3B flickered on at once. The officers immediately realized something terrifying. The apartment was empty. No hidden exits, no open windows, no fire escape movement. The woman had vanished before they arrived. One detective stormed into the hallway asking residents if anyone had seen her leave. Nobody had. But Evan remembered something. Earlier that evening, before the blackout began, he had passed a woman near the apartment mailboxes. Short blonde hair, blue jacket, reading glasses, completely ordinary. He never looked twice at her. 2 weeks later, another woman moved into apartment 2A downstairs. Quiet, polite, dark hair, kept to herself. The first time Evan saw her collecting mail, she smiled politely before returning inside. Then he noticed the familiar scar near her neck, barely visible beneath her collar. And suddenly, the entire building felt unsafe again. The rain started just after sunset, sweeping across the empty Montana highway like a gray curtain. Outside the Silver Pine Motel, the neon vacancy sign buzzed weakly against the storm, casting red reflections across puddles in the cracked parking lot. The motel sat 30 miles outside Billings, surrounded by endless fields, rusted fences, and telephone poles that vanished into darkness. At night, the place felt forgotten by the world. Ethan Cole worked the front desk alone every evening from 8 p.m. until sunrise. Most nights were quiet. Truck drivers stopped for coffee, exhausted tourists rented cheap rooms, and sometimes drunk locals wandered in after midnight looking for cigarettes. Ethan had grown used to the loneliness. The silence didn't bother him anymore, but the guest in room 12 bothered him. The man checked in 10 nights earlier, carrying only a black suitcase and paying entirely in cash. He signed the motel ledger under the name Daniel Mercer, though Ethan doubted it was real. The guest was tall, pale, and strangely calm, with dark eyes that never seemed to blink long enough. His voice carried almost no emotion when he spoke. Room with blackout curtains, he had requested quietly. Since then, Ethan had never seen the man during daylight hours. Every evening around 11 p.m., room 12 would come alive. Footsteps upstairs, the sound of running water, sometimes low voices behind the walls. Then, without fail, visitors began arriving. Different people every night. A nervous woman in a business suit, a tattooed biker with dried blood on his knuckles, an elderly man carrying a leather briefcase, a teenager with shaking hands and bruises beneath his eyes. They all entered the motel looking tense, frightened, desperate. Each one walked directly to the front desk and asked the same question. "Is he still here?" Ethan would glance toward room 12, and they would disappear upstairs. None of them ever came back down. At first, Ethan assumed they were leaving through another exit, but the motel only had one staircase and one front entrance. He began watching carefully after midnight. No footsteps, no car engines, no voices leaving the rooms. Yet by morning, their vehicles were gone. The storm grew heavier on the 11th night. Thunder rolled across the plains while rain battered the motel windows hard enough to shake the glass. Ethan sat behind the counter, flipping through an old magazine, when a young woman entered the lobby wearing a yellow raincoat soaked through with water. She looked terrified. Her mascara had smeared down her cheeks, and she kept glancing nervously toward the parking lot as though someone had followed her there. "I'm looking for a man in room 12, she whispered. Ethan hesitated. The woman leaned closer. "If I don't come back downstairs in 1 hour, she said softly, call the police." Before Ethan could answer, she walked toward the staircase and disappeared into the darkness above. 1 hour passed, then another. No one came back down. At 2:13 a.m., the hallway lights upstairs suddenly flickered twice before going dark for several seconds. Ethan heard something heavy scrape across the floor above him. Then silence, complete silence, the kind that made his skin crawl. He stared at the security monitor behind the desk. Static covered the camera facing room 12. Every other hallway camera worked normally. That was the moment Ethan finally decided to investigate. He grabbed the spare master key from beneath the counter and slowly climbed the stairs. The hallway smelled of damp carpet and cigarette smoke. Water dripped steadily from a leak in the ceiling near room 9. At the far end of the corridor, light glowed faintly beneath the door of room 12. Ethan knocked once. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. With trembling hands, he slid the master key into the lock. The door opened slowly. Inside, the room looked strangely untouched. The bed was neatly made. The television displayed silent black and white static. A coffee cup rested beside the window, still steaming slightly as rain rolled down the glass outside. But something felt wrong. The air smelled metallic, like rust or blood. Ethan stepped farther inside. Several suitcases lined the wall beside the closet, each tagged with different names. Some looked decades old. One carried airport stickers from the 1980s. Another had military tags attached to the handle. Then Ethan noticed the floor beneath the bed. Something metallic reflected the television light. He knelt carefully and reached underneath. His fingers touched a cold steel box. Heart pounding, he dragged it into the open and flipped the latch. Inside were dozens of driver's licenses, passports, and identification cards from different states across America: Texas, Nevada, Wyoming, Colorado, California. Every card carried a different name, but the same face. The same pale man from room 12 stared back at Ethan again and again under different identities. Different hairstyles, different birthdays, different ages, yet somehow exactly the same. Ethan flipped through them faster, panic building in his chest. Some IDs looked over 40 years old. The photographs never changed. A sudden creak echoed behind him. Ethan froze. The bathroom door slowly opened by itself. Darkness waited inside. Then came a voice, soft, calm, almost amused. "You shouldn't touch things that belong to other people." Ethan turned slowly. The guest stood near the doorway of the room, completely motionless. Rainwater dripped from the brim of his black coat onto the carpet. His face looked pale beneath the flickering motel light, but his expression remained empty, unreadable. Ethan backed away instinctively. "Who are you?" he whispered. The man tilted his head slightly. "That depends," he replied quietly, "on which name you recognize." Lightning flashed outside the motel window, illuminating the room in white light for a split second, and Ethan noticed something horrifying. The man cast no reflection in the mirror behind him. The lights suddenly died. Darkness swallowed the room. Ethan heard movement around him, slow footsteps circling through the blackness, impossibly close, yet impossible to locate. His breathing became frantic. Then the voice returned directly beside his ear. "Some people come here because they want to disappear." A long pause. "Others come because they already have." Ethan ran. He stumbled into the hallway, nearly falling down the stairs as thunder exploded outside. He locked himself inside the motel office and waited until sunrise, gripping a revolver he kept beneath the counter. When police arrived later that morning, room 12 was empty. No suitcases, no IDs, no signs anyone had been there at all. The security footage from the hallway showed only static between 1:47 a.m. and 3:06 a.m. The sheriff dismissed Ethan's story as stress and exhaustion. But 3 days later, another traveler checked into the motel just after midnight. Tall, pale, black coat, cash payment. When he signed the ledger, Ethan stared at the name written in careful black ink. Daniel Mercer. The exact same handwriting as before.